What if everything you thought you knew about Jesus' origin was incomplete or even deliberately altered? Imagine, for a moment, that the story passed down for centuries is only the surface of something far more profound, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Has this ever happened to you? You hear a story so deeply ingrained in culture and tradition that questioning it feels almost impossible, and yet something inside you whispers that there's more. That whisper is exactly where our journey begins. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. For over a century, Edgar Cayce has fascinated and unsettled those who've come across his work. Known as the Sleeping Prophet, Cayce claimed to access what he called the Akashic Records, a kind of universal spiritual library that holds the history of every soul, past, present, and future. These weren't just vague impressions or abstract visions. According to Cayce, these records were inscribed not by human hands, but by the very vibrations of the soul itself, a living archive of truth. And within those records lay secrets about Jesus Christ's true spiritual lineage, secrets that could challenge the foundations of the story we've been told for generations. Now think about that for a moment. If there really is such a library beyond time and space, one that preserves the exact history of who we are and where we come from, what would it reveal about the most revered figure in human history? What Cayce found was not the Jesus you read about in a Sunday sermon. This was a being whose journey began long before Bethlehem, a soul who had lived before in other forms, in other worlds, and under other names. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you, maybe even shift the way you understand spirituality itself. Cayce's trances were unlike anything witnessed before. He would lie down, close his eyes, and drift into a state where his conscious mind seemed to step aside, allowing something deeper, vaster, to speak through him. In this altered state, he could see the tapestry of past lives, the movements of the soul through history, and even events in realms beyond earth. And in those moments, he claimed to have seen Jesus' soul, where it came from, what it carried, and, most startling of all, the truth about his origin. According to Cayce, the story of Jesus was written long before humanity was ready to hear it. It wasn't simply a miraculous conception explained in human terms. Instead, the Akashic Records told of a cosmic intervention, orchestrated by forces from a higher plane of existence. Jesus, in Cayce's vision, was not merely sent into the world by divine will. He was prepared, shaped, and sent with a mission rooted in an ancient plan. His arrival on Earth wasn't the beginning of his story. It was the continuation of something far greater, stretching across civilizations and ages. When you hear this, maybe a part of you resists. After all, how could such a powerful truth be hidden? Why would those who knew choose to veil it? Cayce suggested that the people of that time, and even many in our own, weren't ready for the magnitude of what this would mean. The truth, if revealed too soon, could shake the structures of belief that held societies together. But hidden or not, truth has a way of finding its way through the cracks of time, waiting for the moment when minds and hearts are ready to receive it. And perhaps that moment is now. The question is, are you ready to step beyond the familiar story and look at Jesus with new eyes? Because once you hear what Cayce uncovered in those silent, unseen realms, you might never see him, or yourself, the same way again. Now, let's step into the records Cayce described and see what they reveal about the soul of Jesus before his final incarnation. If you enjoy uncovering these deeper truths with me, make sure to subscribe so we can keep exploring them together. Cayce described the moment of Jesus' arrival on Earth as nothing less than a cosmic intervention, a deliberate act orchestrated from a dimension that most of us can't even imagine. It wasn't an accident, nor was it a simple miracle to be filed neatly under mystery of faith. In his visions, this was a precise, intentional alignment of forces, a plan written in the fabric of universal energy itself. The image he painted wasn't of a god perched on a throne issuing commands, but of an intricate network of consciousnesses working together to bring a singular soul into the physical world. This wasn't just theology, it was spiritual architecture on a scale so vast it made human hierarchies seem like grains of sand. And yet, such a vision didn't sit comfortably with the institutions of his time. Imagine presenting a truth so vast that it threatened to rewrite centuries of doctrine. The idea that Jesus' conception was not a divine mystery in the way we've been taught, but a higher dimensional event involving intelligences beyond human form, was more than most religious leaders were willing to entertain. It's no wonder his revelations were met with silence or outright dismissal. To accept them would require not just a shift in belief, but a transformation in the entire structure of spiritual authority. It would mean that the narrative tightly held for centuries had been incomplete, perhaps even intentionally edited, to fit the limits of human understanding. In Trance, Cayce described something startling. The father of Jesus, as he saw it, was not Joseph, as tradition asserts, nor even a father in the human sense at all. What he encountered was a presence without a face or name, a force that couldn't be confined to the shape of a man. It was pure intelligence, a living field of creative power that transcended form, culture, and even the concept of time. This being did not simply send Jesus into the world, it infused his very essence, shaping him long before his earthly body drew breath. To Cayce, this was the true spiritual parentage of the Christ, the core origin that gave him his unmatched connection to the divine. Think about the weight of such an idea. It dissolves the boundaries of religion and culture, and places the story of Jesus in a context that is not just global, but universal. It shifts the focus from earthly genealogy to a lineage of consciousness itself. In Cayce's description, Jesus' arrival was part of a continuum, a journey spanning lifetimes and civilizations, each step preparing him for the mission he would fulfill. This wasn't just the birth of a man, it was the materialization of a soul that had been shaped in realms we can barely comprehend, by hands, or perhaps energies, that existed before the earth itself. When you hear it like this, the resistance of the time becomes easier to understand. Admitting that Jesus, Father, was an infinite, formless consciousness would dismantle centuries of carefully constructed imagery. It would place humanity on an entirely different spiritual map, one where divinity is not a distant monarch, but an active, living presence woven into the very essence of who we are. This truth, Cayce believed, wasn't meant to destroy faith. It was meant to expand it, to open the mind and spirit to a scale of reality most people never dare to consider. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, to explore how Cayce described the mechanics of this cosmic conception, and what it reveals about the forces that move silently behind the scenes of history, shaping events in ways we rarely recognize until centuries later. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." Cayce spoke of a moment before time as we know it, when a gathering of elevated beings, what he called a spiritual council, came together with a singular purpose. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or an act born out of crisis. It was the culmination of a plan that had been unfolding across dimensions, a design crafted with precision far beyond human perception. Each member of this council understood the magnitude of the mission, to bring into the world a soul unlike any other, one who would carry within him the essence of a cosmic intelligence unbound by form. This Father, if such a term could even be used, was not a being you could point to or imagine sitting on a celestial throne. It was pure awareness, the very architecture of creation itself, focused into a single act. In Cayce's vision, Jesus' soul wasn't made in the sense we understand. It wasn't the product of conception as it happens among humans, nor was it a new spark of life emerging from nowhere. It was sent, dispatched from a place outside the limitations of birth and death, into the womb of Mary. This was essence in its purest state, entering the physical plane with all its memory, power, and connection to the source intact. To grasp this fully is to stretch the boundaries of what we think life is. Imagine a consciousness so ancient and so refined that it could move between realms, untouched by the processes we see as natural law. This, Cayce said, was the truth behind the arrival of the Christ. Join the journey. subscribe, and be here for the next chapter of discovery. But here's where the human story takes its familiar turn. In a world bound by its own structures of power, revelations like these were never going to be welcomed openly. For those who controlled spiritual narratives, the idea that Jesus' coming was orchestrated by a council of higher intelligences and that his Father was a formless, universal mind was dangerous. It shifted the center of authority away from earthly institutions and toward an infinite source that existed within and beyond every soul. To admit this would be to dissolve the monopoly on divine truth that religious hierarchies had spent centuries building. And so, these details were not just ignored, they were deliberately removed from the stories told to the masses. The suppression wasn't only about protecting dogma, it was about preserving control. By simplifying Jesus' origin into something symbolic and relatable, leaders could anchor faith in familiar images and roles: God as a father in human form, Mary as the obedient servant, Joseph as the righteous guardian. It made the divine accessible, but at a cost. The deeper truth, the one Cayce described, was left in the shadows, whispered only in esoteric circles and preserved in fragments. It was a truth that asked people to see themselves differently, to accept that the same creative force that sent Jesus could also move through them. And that kind of empowerment has always been the greatest threat to those who rule through fear and limitation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, into the hidden layers of Cayce's descriptions of this spiritual father, how this intelligence operated, why Mary was chosen, and what it means for the way we understand our own place in the greater design of existence. Put down, I'm also on this path. Cayce's visions took Jesus' story far beyond the boundaries of time and place we've been taught to imagine. He spoke of a soul whose existence stretched back before the formation of the earth itself, a consciousness that participated in the very act of creation. This wasn't just a prophet sent to guide humanity. It was a being whose presence had echoed through the birth of worlds, carrying the memory of civilizations long lost to history. In Cayce's account, Jesus walked among the people of Atlantis, witnessing the rise and fall of a culture both advanced and flawed. He lived in ancient Egypt, moving within its sacred schools and mysteries, learning the deep currents of spiritual law that would one day resurface in his mission. Every incarnation, every era, added another layer to his preparation. When the time finally came for his arrival as the Messiah, the process was not simply a divine thought manifesting into human form. Cayce described it as an interdimensional event, where energies from realms beyond our perception aligned perfectly to bring this ancient soul into a physical body. It wasn't a spontaneous miracle, but a deliberate and meticulously timed convergence of cosmic forces, a kind of spiritual engineering that bridged the eternal with the temporal. The conception of Jesus was not about bypassing human biology for spectacle. It was about ensuring that the physical vessel could sustain and channel a frequency of consciousness higher than any human had embodied before. Such an idea redefines the familiar nativity image entirely. It shifts the scene from a small provincial town into the heart of a universal drama, where stars, energies, and dimensions conspired to bring forth a life that would alter the trajectory of human understanding. And yet, this vision didn't fit the narrative early religious authorities wanted to preserve. In the formative centuries of Christianity, decisions were made behind closed doors that determined not just what stories would be told, but what truths would be erased. Gospels that spoke of reincarnation or hinted at Jesus' long cosmic history were declared heretical. Entire texts disappeared, burned, or hidden, so the faithful would never read of their teacher's connection to Atlantis, Egypt, or the act of creation itself. This editing of history wasn't just theological, it was strategic. By presenting Jesus' life as a singular, miraculous occurrence, stripped of its vast prehistory, leaders could shape a simpler, more controllable faith. If his power came from a unique and unrepeatable act, then the pathway to that same connection with the divine was forever closed to ordinary people. But Cayce's revelations point to something very different, that Jesus' journey was part of a continuum, one in which souls evolve, learn, and transform across lifetimes, carrying wisdom from one age into the next. To accept this hidden truth is to see Jesus not only as a savior, but as the most luminous example of what a human being, fully aligned with the source, can become. It suggests that his arrival was not an isolated divine interruption, but a chapter in a much longer story, one that humanity is still living out. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, to trace how these fragments of erased history still linger in ancient symbols, forgotten texts, and the silent spaces between the official lines of Scripture. Write in the comments, "I see the bigger picture." Cayce's account of Mary's conception shatters the familiar boundaries of what we think is possible. He described it not as an act of ordinary biology, but as the moment a field of pure, conscious energy merged with matter. Mary, chosen long before her lifetime for this role, was enveloped by a divine presence so intense that it activated a process no science could replicate or fully explain. This wasn't fertilization as we know it. It was an infusion, a vibrational ignition, in which the laws of the physical world bowed to a higher order. Her womb became the meeting place of two realities, the material and the eternal. If this perspective opened something in you, subscribe, and let's keep going further down this path. But the truth of that event, Cayce warned, was never meant for casual telling in its raw form. The spiritual leaders of the time understood the magnitude of what had happened, but they also feared the consequences of revealing it. To the people of that era, bound by limited understanding and dependent on familiar symbols, a conception through energy and consciousness would have been too abstract, too revolutionary. And so, the narrative was softened, reshaped into something more relatable, a human-like God acting as father, with Mary as the faithful servant, and Joseph as the earthly guardian. It wasn't a fabrication in the sense of being false. It was a translation, a simplification, crafted to protect both the mystery and the hierarchy of the institutions that claim to speak for the divine. Yet Cayce's revelations pull back that layer of interpretation and place us face to face with a staggering possibility, that the Father of Jesus was not a being in any form we can imagine, but the very consciousness that shapes universes, a formless, boundless intelligence that exists not somewhere out there, but within and around all that is. This vision doesn't reduce the miracle of Jesus' birth. It magnifies it beyond measure. The source that ignited his life is the same source that breathes existence into galaxies, that holds the architecture of reality itself. When you consider it from this perspective, the Nativity becomes something far more than a holy scene in a stable. It becomes a moment when the core frequency of creation itself stepped into human history. The child in Mary's arms was not just a savior sent to fix what was broken. He was the embodiment of the very force that made all things possible, walking in the vulnerability of human flesh. This understanding reframes not only the miracle of birth, but the very nature of divine connection. It suggests that the same formless intelligence that fathered Jesus is not confined to a distant realm, but is alive in the background of every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of creation in our own lives. The implications of this are immense. It means that what was once seen as an unattainable divine act might be a glimpse into the deeper mechanics of reality, mechanics that are still at play today. Cayce's insights invite us to question whether the real miracle was not only that Jesus came into the world in this way, but that this creative force continues to move through the fabric of existence, waiting for us to recognize it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how Cayce described the interaction between this cosmic force and Mary's unique spiritual preparation, and what that reveals about the hidden architecture of destiny. Write in the comments, "I feel the connection." Cayce's descriptions merge the mystical with something that feels almost scientific in its precision, as if faith and spiritual science were never meant to be separate at all. He spoke of Jesus' Father not as a figure to be painted or sculpted, but as a timeless field of light, a conscious, creative force that existed before stars were born and will remain long after they fade. This field did not simply decide to send a soul into the world, it shaped that soul across lifetimes, refining it until it could carry the weight of the mission ahead. Every facet of Jesus' being, his wisdom, his compassion, his unshakable clarity, was the result of an intentional process of preparation that began long before Bethlehem ever appeared on a map. Mary's role in this design was no less extraordinary. Cayce described her not merely as a humble young woman, chosen for her devotion, but as a soul whose preparations spanned eons. Across lifetimes, in civilizations now forgotten, she cultivated qualities that would one day make her the only vessel capable of holding such a force. Her selection wasn't an act of favoritism from the heavens. It was the natural conclusion of a spiritual journey in which every decision, every act of courage, every moment of surrender had been steps toward this exact point in history. By the time the moment came, she didn't just accept the mission. She embodied the readiness to live it fully. And at the heart of this orchestration was a being that Cayce insisted was beyond names, beyond religions, beyond any attempt to define. To speak of this cosmic father as God in the limited human sense was, in Cayce's view, to reduce it to something far smaller than it truly was. This was not the deity of one culture or one faith. It was the essence of pure truth itself, the current of life that animates all things without, belonging to any of them. It exists as much in the silence between stars as it does in the beating of a heart, and its nature is neither confined by dogma nor diminished by human misunderstanding. When seen in this light, the story shifts from a singular, culture-bound miracle to a universal event with implications for every soul. If Jesus' life was shaped by this field of light, then it means such a force is not distant. It is accessible, moving quietly behind the scenes in our own lives, guiding us toward moments of transformation we may not yet see coming. It challenges the mindset that sees divinity as something locked in the past, reminding us that the same current that formed the Christ continues to flow through the present, through us. Cayce's account invites a radical change in perspective. It asks us to look beyond familiar images and see the divine as an infinite intelligence, one that is always in motion, always shaping, always calling us toward alignment with our highest purpose. This is the hidden truth that lies beneath the softened stories we've inherited. The truth that Mary's readiness and Jesus' formation were not isolated miracles, but parts of a pattern that touches all of creation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how Cayce described the way this field of light interacted with human consciousness, and what it reveals about the architecture of destiny itself. Write in the comments, "I feel the light." From the moment he entered this world, Jesus carried with him the memory of where he had come from. This wasn't memory in the way we usually think of it, not a series of images or stories, but a deep, unshakable awareness of his higher origin. It was as if the core of his being was permanently aligned with a frequency most of us only glimpse in moments of profound clarity. That awareness wasn't a burden. It was the compass that guided every step of his journey. It shaped his decisions, his words, and the way he saw every soul he encountered, not as a stranger, but as part of the same source he knew so intimately. Stay connected to these conversations. Hit subscribe and keep this flow of insights coming. Cayce described this as the quiet power behind Jesus' transformative mission. He didn't act from mere conviction or personal belief. He acted from direct connection. This connection wasn't intermittent. It was constant. Like a river that never stopped flowing, the energy of the cosmic Father moved through him, without pause. Every miracle, every act of compassion, every confrontation with injustice was fueled by that unbroken current. It wasn't about following a set of rules or living up to an external standard. It was about embodying the vibration he had carried from before his birth. This is where Cayce's view of true fatherhood comes sharply into focus. To him, being a father in the divine sense was never about biological generation. It was about something far more profound, programming the essence of a soul with the vibration of its purpose. In Jesus' case, that programming was perfect and complete, a direct infusion of the cosmic Father's consciousness into human form. The body came from Mary, but the essence came from an eternal field of light that shaped not only his nature, but the way he would interact with the world. Seen in this way, Jesus' life becomes an example of what happens when a soul is fully aligned with its original design. His compassion wasn't learned, it was inherent. His clarity didn't come from study, it was the natural state of a being who remembered. And that memory wasn't static, it was dynamic, constantly activated by the presence of the cosmic Father within him. Even in moments of solitude, when the world misunderstood or opposed him, that inner voice never left. It was the same presence that had shaped his soul over countless ages, now guiding him through the limitations and challenges of human existence. The implications for us are powerful. If fatherhood, in its truest sense, is about infusing essence, then it means that what we inherit spiritually is not limited to our earthly lineage. It suggests that every soul has been imprinted with something from the same source, a blueprint of purpose and potential that, if awakened, can transform the way we move through the world. For Jesus, that imprint was pure and fully realized. For us, it may be dormant, waiting for recognition. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, looking at how Cayce believed this vibrational imprint interacts with human free will, and how the choices we make can either align us with our original design or pull us further away from it. Write in the comments, "I carry the imprint." Cayce's visions revealed Jesus not as a figure who appeared suddenly, fully formed for a single mission, but as an ancient soul who had walked the earth many times before, each life a chapter in a far greater story. He spoke of incarnations as Enoch, Melchizedek, and other figures, shrouded in both history and legend. These were not random lifetimes but carefully chosen roles, each one refining his nature, deepening his compassion, and strengthening his bond with the Source. In each era, he carried the essence of his higher origin, adapting it to the culture and needs of the people he lived among, leaving behind seeds of wisdom that would eventually bloom into the teachings we now associate with the Christ. This preparation was not limited to a single civilization, or even a single continent. From the spiritual grandeur of ancient temples to the quiet moments of service in forgotten communities, every incarnation added another layer of mastery. Some lives were marked by great influence and visible impact, others by humility and quiet endurance. Cayce suggested that these contrasting experiences were essential, each one tempering his spirit and expanding his understanding of the human condition. By the time he came to live as Jesus of Nazareth, he had accumulated not only the wisdom of multiple lifetimes, but also a profound empathy for every stage of human struggle and transformation. Yet, the most striking part of Cayce's account lies in what happened between those lives. After each incarnation, Jesus' soul did not simply rest, it entered a realm of pure alignment, where the cosmic Father would instruct him directly. These intervals were moments of deep realignment, where the weight and residue of human experience were gently lifted, and the original, vibrational imprint was restored to its full clarity. Cayce described these as periods of cosmic training, far removed from the limitations of time, where the soul could absorb new instructions, refine its mission, and prepare for the challenges ahead. It's here that we begin to see the true scope of his preparation. His journey was not only about learning how to live in the physical world, but also about mastering the art of bringing the eternal into the temporal without losing its purity. Each return to the cosmic Father's presence was like stepping back into the heart of creation, recharging with the energy and clarity needed to face another human life. This rhythm, life, alignment, instruction, return, was the foundation of his evolution and the secret behind his ability to live as both fully human and fully divine. When you view his mission through this lens, it becomes clear that his life as Jesus was the culmination of thousands of years of preparation. It was the point where all the threads of his previous lives, all the wisdom gathered across civilizations, and all the training in the realms beyond matter converged into a single, unbroken purpose. This is not just a story of a man born to change the world. It is the story of a soul whose every choice, every challenge, and every moment had been leading to that precise point in history. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how Cayce's descriptions of these past lives connect to the hidden history of humanity itself and what they reveal about the long arc of spiritual evolution that shapes not only great teachers, but every soul. Write in the comments, "I see the journey." Bethlehem was more than the location of a historical birth. It was the stage for the final act of a plan that had been unfolding for millennia. Every life Jesus had lived, every lesson learned, and every alignment with the cosmic Father had led to this point. The night of his arrival was not simply the beginning of his earthly mission, but the moment when the sum of countless incarnations and cosmic preparations condensed into one human life. The stable, the star, the shepherds. These were symbols woven into a much greater design, one that existed long before any of the witnesses took their place in the story. Within that design, Joseph's role is often misunderstood. Tradition presents him as the earthly father, but Cayce's insights reveal something deeper. Joseph was not the generator of Jesus' soul, but the guardian of his body, the physical vessel that would carry the light of a higher realm into the world. His mission was no less vital for being symbolic. Without his presence, the fragile beginnings of that mission could have been compromised before it even began. He was the one tasked with holding the balance between the spiritual magnitude of the child and the harsh realities of the human world. Joseph's strength came not from physical power alone, but from a willingness to act without needing full understanding. Guided by dreams and visions that came from higher planes, he accepted instructions without hesitation, trusting the source from which they came. These weren't ordinary dreams, they were direct communications from the same cosmic intelligence that had shaped Jesus' essence. In the stillness of night, in moments of deep vulnerability, Joseph would receive messages that altered the course of their lives, warnings to flee, confirmations of safety, and quiet assurances that his role, though silent, was essential. What makes Joseph's story remarkable is the way he embraced a destiny that offered no recognition, no glory, and no guarantee of comprehension from those around him. His humility and obedience were not the obedience of blind submission, but of a man who sensed he was participating in something larger than himself. It was a decision to protect without possessing, to guard without claiming ownership. In this way, Joseph became an earthly reflection of the cosmic Father, present, protective and selfless, yet never seeking to take credit for the creation he was safeguarding. When we look at the Nativity through this lens, the dynamic between Mary, Joseph, and Jesus becomes more than a family. It becomes a spiritual formation, each member fulfilling a distinct role in alignment with the larger purpose. Mary carried the divine into flesh. Joseph shielded it from the vulnerabilities of the world, and Jesus embodied the mission that had been set into motion before the dawn of human history. This reframing changes not only how we see the individuals in the story, but also how we understand the nature of destiny itself. It reminds us that sometimes the most significant contributions are made behind the scenes, in decisions that may seem small in the moment, but carry immeasurable impact over time. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how Cayce's revelations about Joseph's connection to Mary and their shared spiritual preparation reveal an even more intricate web of destiny than most imagine. Write in the comments, "I protect the light." Cayce's insights into Joseph's life suggest that his quiet strength was no accident. The patience, discernment, and steady presence he displayed were not qualities learned overnight, but the result of a much longer journey. In Cayce's view, Joseph's soul had been preparing across lifetimes, refining virtues that would one day be essential for one of the most delicate missions in human history. His role demanded more than courage. It required restraint, humility, and the wisdom to protect without controlling, to act decisively without letting ego interfere. These were the hallmarks of a man whose spiritual preparation had already been tested in other times and other places. In this larger tapestry, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus formed what could only be called a spiritual family design, a structure as intentional as the architecture of the cosmos itself. Each one held a role that no other could fill. Mary's was to embody the bridge between the eternal and the human, to carry into the physical world a being who came from beyond it. Joseph's was to shield that mission in its most vulnerable phase, ensuring the body and life of Jesus could survive to fulfill their purpose. And Jesus, of course, was the living convergence of divine energy and human experience, a soul who came not only to teach, but to demonstrate what alignment with the Source truly looked like in action. This design was not the result of chance, or even of a single divine decision. It was the culmination of ages of preparation, synchronicity, and choice. In Cayce's descriptions, the arrangement of these three lives was as precise as the alignment of celestial bodies, each moving in harmony to create a rare moment in history when the veil between worlds thinned enough for the eternal to step into time. At the center of this formation was Jesus' own vibrational essence. Cayce explained that unlike any other human, he did not carry the ordinary DNA passed through generations. His body was not the product of typical genetic inheritance, but a fusion of divine energy and matter, a vessel designed to hold a frequency that would overwhelm an unprepared form. This energetic blueprint was the key to everything he would later do, from his extraordinary healings to his ability to read the heart of a person without a word being spoken. The energy wasn't just within him, it radiated through him, subtly, altering the space and the people around him. Understanding this changes how we see every moment of his life. The miracles were not interruptions of natural law. They were the natural expression of a body and soul, perfectly attuned to the higher order of reality. His presence alone carried an impact, shifting the emotional and spiritual atmosphere of those near him. And Joseph and Mary, through their unique preparation, were the only ones capable of holding that presence close without being undone by it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how Cayce described the specific ways Jesus' vibrational design interacted with the physical world, and what that reveals about the hidden mechanics of miracles and transformation. Write in the comments, "I see the design." Cayce's portrayal of Jesus' physical form is unlike anything in traditional accounts. He described it as a body of light, carefully adapted to exist within the density of matter without losing its connection to the higher realms. This wasn't a poetic metaphor, it was a literal energetic design. The very cells of his body held a frequency that allowed the laws of the spiritual and material worlds to meet without conflict. In such a vessel, what we call miracles were not extraordinary events breaking the rules of nature, but rather the natural outcome of a being living in full harmony with the original blueprint of creation. Because of this unique constitution, Jesus could perceive reality in layers that most of us can't access. He could see the currents beneath the surface of life, the emotional patterns, the spiritual imbalances, the potential futures branching from each decision. This higher perception allowed him to respond to people not just as they were, but as they could become. Healing, in this sense, wasn't only about restoring the body, it was about realigning someone to their original vibrational pattern, the state of wholeness they were created to inhabit. What made this possible was his constant access to universal energy. Cayce described him as a living portal, a bridge between heaven and earth through which the flow of divine power never ceased. It wasn't something he had to summon or call down. It was who he was. Every word, every touch, every silent moment carried the current of that connection. In his presence, people often felt peace, clarity, or an unexplainable shift in their inner state, even if no visible miracle took place. It was the energy moving through him, subtly transforming the atmosphere around him and igniting change from within. Cayce took this even further by saying that the very light DNA that formed Jesus exists in all of us, though often dormant. The difference wasn't that he possessed something humanity lacked, it was that his connection to it was fully awake, fully expressed. In every encounter, he was not only demonstrating divine power, but also reflecting a hidden truth about the human condition, that within each person lies a spark of that same light, waiting for recognition. This perspective shifts the entire meaning of his mission. It wasn't simply to save humanity from the outside, but to awaken the divine presence already living within it. Each miracle was both a restoration of the person before him and a reminder to everyone watching that such alignment was possible for themselves. It was an invitation to remember, to see beyond the limits of ordinary perception, and to choose a path of transformation that reconnected them to the source. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how Cayce believed this dormant spark can be reawakened, and what role our mindset, daily choices, and spiritual awareness play in bridging the gap between the life we know and the life we were originally designed to live. Write in the comments, "The spark is in me." For over a century, the truth Cayce uncovered about Jesus remained hidden, not because it lacked power, but precisely because it carried too much. His revelations were radical, not in a way that denied faith, but in a way that redefined it, expanding it beyond the boundaries institutions had carefully built. Such a message could not simply be dropped into a world still bound by fear, rigid dogma, and dependence on religious authority. It needed to wait until the human mindset shifted enough to even begin to hold it. In Cayce's words, this was a truth that had to be timed, just as carefully as the events it described. While mainstream society forgot, or perhaps never knew, small circles of seekers refused to let the flame go out. Spiritual groups, often quiet and invisible to the outside world, became the guardians of these records. They kept them safe, passing them down with reverence, knowing they carried a potential that could one day ignite transformation on a global scale. These were not public movements or loud protests. They were silent keepers of the hidden truth, waiting for the right convergence of time, awareness, and collective readiness. Cayce hinted that this secrecy was not only a matter of protection from suppression, but also part of the design itself. Just as seeds lie dormant until the season is right, these revelations were preserved so they could emerge in a world where more hearts and minds would be able to recognize them for what they were. In that sense, even the long silence was not wasted time. It was preparation. What makes this even more compelling is that Cayce saw Jesus' arrival as something far beyond coincidence or divine whim. He described it as a precise universal plan, orchestrated with the same mathematical intelligence that governs the movement of galaxies. Every factor, the alignment of certain souls, the conditions of the world, the readiness of specific places and people, was accounted for. This wasn't simply about sending a teacher into history. It was about ensuring that every element of his life, from the place of birth to the people surrounding him, would serve the mission's purpose with exact precision. In this framework, Bethlehem was not just a location, it was a calculated point in space and time, chosen because it harmonized with larger cycles we barely understand. The timing of his birth, the lineage into which he was placed, the challenges he would face, all of it was part of a greater equation, one that had been in motion long before Earth even took its current form. Seeing his life through this lens dissolves the idea of randomness. It reveals the depth of intentionality behind every event and suggests that the same universal intelligence capable of orchestrating such a plan is still active now. If it could weave together the countless threads that led to that singular moment, what might it already be weaving in our own time, behind the scenes, unnoticed, until the pattern becomes clear? Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how Cayce believed these cosmic alignments influence not only the lives of great, spiritual figures, but also the turning points in our own personal journeys. Write in the comments, "I trust the timing." If Cayce's revelations are true, then they don't just add an interesting footnote to history. They call for a complete reorientation of how we understand faith itself. If Jesus' origin was vibrational rather than purely biological, it means religion can no longer be confined to dogma, tradition, or the structures we've inherited. It would have to expand toward consciousness, toward a living, personal connection with the same field of light that shaped him. This kind of faith is not about memorizing rules or reciting words. It's about stepping into an awareness that transforms how we see ourselves, others, and the world. In this expanded view, Christ is not an exclusive figure claimed by a single tradition. Cayce described Christ as a state of consciousness, a universal frequency that anyone, anywhere, can access when they align themselves with it. It's not tied to a culture, a language, or a building. It's an internal reality that transcends the labels we've placed on it. When we strip away the layers of religious ownership, What remains is a truth that is at once deeply personal and profoundly collective. The same current that flowed through Jesus can flow through anyone willing to awaken to it. And here is where this perspective begins to heal some of the deepest wounds people carry around faith. For generations, countless souls have turned away from God, not because they rejected love, but because they were told that God was a distant judge, tallying failures and handing down punishments. Cayce's vision replaces that image with something far more transformative: God as the loving source that generates consciousness itself, the origin point of our being, and the constant companion in our journey. When God is seen in this way, fear gives way to recognition. Guilt dissolves into understanding. Spirituality stops being a performance to earn divine favor and becomes a process of uncovering what has been within us all along. This is not a softening of faith, it's a strengthening. It demands more personal responsibility because it shifts the focus from obedience to alignment, from external approval to inner transformation. Seeing Christ as a state of consciousness also changes the way we relate to one another. If the spark of that same light exists in all people, then separation begins to feel like an illusion we've been conditioned to accept. The divisions of religion, nationality, and belief lose their power when we realize we are all carrying the same essence, simply at different stages of awakening to it. The impact of living from this awareness is profound. It reshapes decisions, values, and even the way we perceive conflict. Cayce's revelations don't invite us to abandon our traditions, but to transcend their limitations. They encourage us to hold on to what elevates us while releasing what binds us in fear. They call us to expand beyond the walls of any one belief system and step into the living reality of connection with the Source. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how embracing Christ consciousness in this way could transform not just individual lives, but the collective trajectory of humanity itself. Write in the comments, "I choose alignment." Cayce's vision of the future of faith is not about dismantling what people believe, but about shifting the center of that belief from the external to the internal. He saw a time when humanity would no longer seek the divine exclusively in temples, rituals, or intermediaries, but would recognize the presence of the Cosmic Father living within each person. In this perspective, the sacred is not something to be reached for. It's something to be uncovered, nurtured, and expressed. Faith becomes less about adherence to inherited structures and more about cultivating direct awareness of the light already present in our own consciousness. This shift transforms the very fabric of spirituality. It means that devotion is no longer measured by the repetition of prayers or the observance of rules, but by the degree to which one aligns with the creative force within. Acts of kindness, decisions rooted in integrity, and a mindset oriented toward unity become the true expressions of worship. In this way, the spiritual journey stops being about striving toward an unattainable ideal and becomes about embodying the truth that has been there from the start. The invitation to awaken, as Cayce described it, is both deeply personal and profoundly collective. On the individual level, it's a call to question the narratives we've accepted without examination, to look behind the scenes of our own belief systems, and to discern whether they lead us toward expansion or keep us in limitation. On the collective level, it's a movement toward a world where the awareness of our shared divine origin reshapes our relationships, our priorities, and even our systems of governance and care. Awakening, in this sense, is not a single moment of realization. It's an ongoing process of peeling back layers of conditioning, fear, and false separation. It's the courage to see ourselves as participants in a vast interconnected web of consciousness, and the humility to live in a way that honors that connection. The hidden truth that Cayce preserved for over a century is that the same light that shaped Jesus is the foundation of every soul, regardless of culture, creed, or history. Accepting this changes everything. It redefines identity, not as something inherited from family or society, but as something sourced from the very fabric of creation. It reframes our challenges, not as punishments or random misfortunes, but as opportunities to realign with the essence we carry. and it transforms the way we see others, making it far more difficult to dehumanize, dismiss, or harm those who share the same origin. This is the heart of Cayce's message, that faith of the future is faith as consciousness. It is a living, breathing awareness that does not depend on fear, control, or separation, but thrives on recognition, unity, and co-creation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, exploring how this awakening might unfold on a global scale and the transformative impact it could have on the next chapter of humanity's journey. Write in the comments, "I awaken to the light." If you've stayed with me until now, I think you already know how much depth and meaning these insights can bring to our understanding of life, faith, and who we really are. That's exactly what we do here. Explore the hidden truths, the forgotten histories, and the perspectives that invite real transformation. So, if this journey spoke to you, subscribe so you can keep walking it with me. And since you've made it to the very end, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," so I know you were here for every step. If this message resonated, give the video a like. It's a simple way to keep this connection alive. There's a video right here that complements everything we've explored today. Click it and continue with me over there. Let's keep going deeper together.